Hello and welcome to Lion and Mouse Commentary. I'm Tori and this is my best friend Holland.
Hello.
If you're new to our show, we rank various forms of entertainment by different categories out of a total score of 10, with only 2 points allowed for our personal taste. Don't worry, we will break everything down as we go. So feel free to agree, disagree, or just find something new to enjoy. Be sure to tread lightly. There will be hot takes and spoilers ahead. Cut to the intro. Okay, today I chose...
You couldn't read the title.
Yeah. Nancy Drew, Mystery of the Seven Keys, which is the 34th game of the Nancy Drew computer game series from Her Interactive. This was familiar to me, but still new, and blind to Holland in prepping for this podcast. If this is new to you, here is some spoiler-free background before we get into our scores. So this was released on May 7th, 2024. Like I said, it's the 34th installment in the main series of the Nancy Drew PC games by Her Interactive. This one was loosely based on the book The Nancy Drew Files number 83, Diamond Deceit. Some of the voice stars, but not all of them, are Brittany Cox, Rochelle Hager, Kelly Baskin, Kieran Regan, Cameron McKinney, and Scott Carty. This game was originally announced on April 1st, 2023. A very long development period occurred since the last game in the series, which was released, which was titled Midnight in Salem, Game 33. That game was released in December 2019, making this a 4.5-year development. And it's the same length of development that happened between Game 32, which was Sea of Darkness, and Midnight in Salem. By comparison, Her Interactive as a company used to produce games every 6 to 8 months. So the last 2 games have had a very long development period each.
I didn't realize it was 4 years.
4.5 years.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. So pretty long time. As of this recording, this game is available digitally only through Her Interactive's website and Steam. They did do a limited run physical copies by pre-order only. As of this recording, those physical copies are now over a month late to ship. But
how would you know?
I would know that because I ordered one. And they were supposed to ship out the last week of July. And now they are expected to ship the last week of August 2024, which will be about the time that this episode releases.
Yeah. So hopefully. Tori is recovering from a head cold. So
my apologies.
She will be trying to mute her mic. So if you're just listening only, if you haven't started watching our video series, we apologize for any of the coughs that may make it through sound production, but we're doing our best here.
Yeah, apologies. Trying to kick some summer cold sickness. Okay, well, with that said, that's all the stuff I have for like fact sheet. So Holland, you want to go ahead and kick us off in our first category?
So for those of you that may be new to our show, Tori is a Nancy Drew super fan, I would say.
I would say as well.
She's been playing the game since you were how old?
I got the very first Nancy Drew game my 10th birthday.
So a long time.
A long time.
So only 8 years.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So Tori is a Nancy Drew super fan, and she introduced the games to me when we started being friends and hanging out together. So I have with her
coercion.
Persuasion, I think would be better.
Okay.
Played through all of the games as well, but I am not a Nancy Drew super fan. But I did enjoy playing the games with Tori because she's my best friend. That was kind of one of the reasons that we thought making a podcast would be good, because we've introduced each other to a lot of things that we're fans of throughout our friendship. So anyways, a little backstory for you. Completely unnecessary. But our first category for video games is characters, story, and world. So we kind of lump this all in together. Coming up with a categories for video games was a little tricky because there's some video games that are extremely story based. There's some that are very like immersive in the world. There's some that are very character heavy. So we kind of lump all of these factors into one singular category because all of those can vary or have more or less emphasis based on the kind of game you're playing. So, but I think the Nancy Drew game series is kind of a good game that should balance all of those things together, just because of the nature of the inspiration of the games. So, character, story, and world has a total possible score of 2 points. For every category, spoiler, for every category in the video game category has a total possible score of 2 points. So we have 5 categories. They all are weighted pretty equally because your experience of a video game can also be really different. So anyways, that's for our new viewers, just in case you're catching us for our visual podcast.
And it's been a while since we've done a video game.
It has. So this is for you guys. So out of a total possible score of 2, I gave this a 1 out of 2, which I kind of went back and forth. I really wasn't sure how to score this. So we did score a previous Nancy Drew game, which in my opinion, as a not super fan, I think is a little more true to the way that Nancy Drew games used to be produced. Maybe not the favorite or a fan favorite or what people would put on a pedestal as the quality of a Nancy Drew game, but I feel like this game doesn't hit the mark of what you would expect in a Nancy Drew story. And that's just trying to kind of compare apples to apples there, but I also tried to compare kind of apples to oranges with other video games. There are a lot of games out there released in 2024 that are insanely detailed and immersive when it comes to character building, world building, story, the way that your choices can affect the outcome of the game, things like that. Like, that's incredibly detailed and intricate. And this game just isn't one of those games. That's not a fault to the game itself per se, but I think for both of those reasons and thinking into both of those kinds of games, this just isn't, to me, it's a bit lackluster, but I think it does deserve some credit. So I think overall, the premise is not bad. The setup of the premise of this mystery, which you expect a Nancy Drew game is going to be a mystery-based game. There's a case you have to solve. That's a good, solid premise for a game. The overall premise is not bad. There's this woman that has, jewels to a priceless necklace that people are saying are fake. There's this underground crime network that you find out about. This kind of like a mafia style, not crime lords, but for lack of a better term, this underground crime network. There's a legend that's based in history that kind of comes into play here of the history of the city of Prague that you're in. And so you have all of those 3 things are really good. You kind of have this heist, caper kind of premise, this, crime, jewel thieves or, people trying to undermine, are they trying to overthrow government, organizations or, a little bit of a Robin Hood premise, like they're trying to, give back to the people. And then this kind of premise of, and there's this like really deep, rich history, like European history that's, compared to American history is thousands of years old. And so you have all these things to kind of pull from, and they're supposed to kind of all come together and like merge within this story. And I just feel like it is a great start, but it wasn't executed very well in this game. It feels very piecemealed and kind of haphazard in how they kind of pull all of those things together. The mystery as a setting, I think, is a great start. It gets you jumped in, pretty engaging, I would say. So that's kind of my general take on the story, and the characters and the world. I think the characters are all pretty flat. They're not very interesting. They're all pretty forgettable. Some of them feel either like a stereotype of a character or kind of like we need a nerdy tech person. Insert character here. Like, we need this kind of like semi-charming man young adult man that wants Nancy to help him out, and then you kind of have a little sympathy for him, and then you think he's this really nice guy, Mr. Nice Guy kind of character trope, and you kind of insert character here, and then you have this jovial local coffee shop owner, like insert character here. I feel like a lot of it was kind of like cookie cutter paper doll characters, and all of them to me were just really forgettable and bland. If characters were the only category, I'd probably give it a 0, just because like I couldn't really tell you much about anybody, and I don't really think anybody's that memorable, but I guess they technically fit the NPC role. But in comparison to the quality of a lot of video games, you can have some pretty incredible NPCs out there, and compared to other Nancy Drew games, you learn a lot about these characters. So while I think you could argue, oh, we don't need deep characters to have a good game, I think that that's not entirely true, because at the end of the day, you are telling a story and moving it forward. Just some kind of specific story notes I had, like some kind of plot hole-esque, like weird moves that I feel like they made to as like plot convenience for the story. Nancy has like this moment where she's talking to this FBI agent and she's just like, I'll just put you on speaker. He's like literally trying to tell her classified information. She's like, I'll just put you on speakerphone around people that are all suspects in the mystery. Like, come on, a detective should be smarter than that. Like, we're not 5. This isn't a 5-year-old, like, you know, Toon Disney, like, Nickelodeon, Nick Jr. style, like,
and it's not even like mystery. Nancy's first case either. Right.
It's, you know, we should have a little bit more, like, intelligence than that. The fact that Nancy, like, leaves the journal overnight behind the counter of a coffee shop that clearly doesn't lock up at night, like, that's just dumb. Like, this is a priceless artifact that you just found, and then we're just gonna, oh, you know what, I'll just leave this on the desk of the coffee shop overnight. Like, that just doesn't make any sense. Like, the fact that when you, towards the end of the mystery, you have to unlock the door with all these keys, and then the villain that you're chasing unlocks the door with all these keys and then goes inside the door, but then all the keys are left in the door.
Yeah.
Like, no, they're not left in the door. They're taken out of the door, put into a purse, and the purse is sitting beside the door.
Yeah.
Like, that, like, just,
why'd you leave those there?
Right. You unlocked the door and then just left whoever might be following you just the means to get in right there. Like, that makes no sense whatsoever. Just completely nonsensical. The whole part with the ghost tour, that's kind of a part of the plot where you have to do this ghost tour at night and get this information, and it just was like super lame. Like it's like they didn't even really try. They just, you go into the museum and there's fog, and then you still just read everything that you can read in the daytime except for what's behind kind of the ropes. But it's like, it's just a museum with fog and the ghost from the Jackbox game murder trivia party. Like, it's not even anything like different or unique. Like, it's just, nope, now there's some fog, and guess what, nothing's changed or giving you a whole lot of new information, except you have access to a different part of the museum that you can see during the day. Like, nothing's like super fun happens there. I really hated there's a part where this ghost is like chasing you in the tunnels, and it's just completely nonsensical there too. It's like, we're then led to believe that this ghost was a person in a costume, but that's not really explained very well, because the ghost we see later doesn't look like the ghost that chased us, and the ghost, when it's chasing us in the tunnels, like, okay, so this thing is catching us, but it's a person, or is it this like mystical entity? Like, well, we don't know. Well, you'll figure it out eventually. Like, no, there should be something that kind of connects it or ties it into, like, oh, actually, the reason this happened was because it was a person in a costume, or was it a puppet, or was it, you know, was it something that's not really there? Was it this like technological hologram? Like, no, there should have been something to kind of connect the threads, because I felt like those threads weren't even connected. Because the costume you see the character wearing later on, when you're like, aha, there wasn't a real ghost. It's like Scooby-Doo mystery. Like, it doesn't even match the costume. Like, Scooby-Doo could at least match the costumes of people. In general, kind of towards the end of the game, I feel like with dialogue and characters, there's just so much exposition. It's like the characters are just placeholders to kind of give you the exposition and the rest of the story, which, don't get me wrong, a lot of the exposition is pretty interesting. Like, they give you some of the history of Prague, they give you the history of where the crown jewels are and what they were for, and the 7 keys that you have to find, which unlocks the crown jewels, and why there are 7 keys. The puppet game tells you a lot of the story and kind of gives you the title of the story, and I think that that's a great way to convey kind of some background, some historical background, some motivation for why would somebody want to steal the crown jewels, why would somebody want to find all these keys. I feel like that was really, really good exposition, and that was kind of where that all kind of stopped, and the rest of it was just like these characters just giving you long monologues about why they, you know, think this or that, but it doesn't really unfold the story as well until you find out, oh, now the mystery's been revealed. I found out that these people are villains, or these people are doing nefarious things, or this person's the main villain and they were working with this person. And then their motivation wasn't anything you discovered along the way. They tell you in this big long monologue after they've been revealed. So there's no like breadcrumbs left for you along the way to kind of ease you into this story, and you can kind of piece things together and kind of figure things out as you go. Those are my favorite kinds of mystery games, especially, and again, this is not a personal taste and preference, but I feel like those are the best mysteries, ones that give you little breadcrumbs along the way, and then once you find the ending, you can go back and look and be like, oh, that's why that breadcrumb was there.
Yeah.
And I feel like that does not happen in this game really at all. So I think that the fact that they had multiple villains and they're all kind of varying levels of the story, and like their motives were different. Again, I think it was a good premise. I think the reason why this villain or that villain made that decision, I think once they give you their big long monologue and tell you everything, like, okay, there were some good nuggets in there, but like, I'm just bored finding out the story because, one, I didn't have any suspense or suspicion on this person along the way. Right. And now all the curtains are just being lifted, and it's like, surprise, here was the big scary story behind it. And it's like, well, I'm not scared anymore because it's over.
Right.
Like the reason is pointless at this point. And I just feel like that just makes a really lackluster mystery. I also thought the villain's monologue at the end, it was just way too much exposition, and some of it kind of felt like a therapy session. Like they were just giving you all of their like past trauma and like why they, thought like why I made this decision was because I was so upset about my past. And it's like, no, it would have been great to like hear those feelings of like hurt and resentment before we found out you were the villain, and then we could think like, maybe that's the motive for why they're the villain.
Right.
And the fact that you only have like 4 or 5 characters, and then it turns out like maybe technically there's like 6 or 7 characters, and then it turns out 4 of them are all villains. Like, I feel like that's just kind of low hanging fruit. You didn't have a lot to like motivate any of them. So you're like, well, let's just make them all villains, where sometimes that can be an interesting plot of, where these people were in cahoots together, but it just, again, it's a good premise, but it just really fell apart. Oh yeah. Sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit, but I wrote with the ghost chasing you. It's like, and then Nancy decides that she's going to confront it. It just really feels like way out of the blue. It doesn't really feel connected to the rest of the story. The whole fact that a ghost is chasing you in the tunnels, and then Nancy wants to try and corner it and figure out who it is that's chasing her. Like all of that, again, like never really feels connected to the rest of the story. And so I feel like we had pockets of good story and pockets of decent characters, and then it just wasn't all brought together at the end. It's like they tried to do too much and the developers tried to do too much and spread themselves too thin. I also think the kind of the premise of alchemy is a good premise. It's really interesting, but I think making the fact that it turns out you can make jewels with alchemy, like that's a huge like plot.
Yeah.
Like that's insane. Like if alchemy, like people in ancient times were trying to figure out how to turn lead into gold forever, and it's never been done. And now all of a sudden, guess what? Alchemy's real, and we can make valuable, precious things out of dust. And yeah, okay, that's fine. Let's move on.
Yeah.
Like this is a huge like development of science.
Right.
And we're just like, yeah, it's whatever.
Yeah, it's like kind of glossed over.
Yeah. That alone could have been the plot of the whole game, was that somebody had figured out how to make alchemy work. Right. And then it turns out they're just making fake jewels and like swindling all these people. Right. Like that could have been alone. Like that plot in and of itself would have been great. And you could have executed it really well instead of trying to add all these other things in.
Right.
The only other real note I have for story is that there's a part where the coffee the coffee lady, I can't remember her name.
Patrizia.
Where she's like, yeah, my ancestors used to serve coffee to the king. And it's like, I think that is the biggest lie to tell tourists. That sounds exactly like what the coffee shop that was built outside of the
Buckingham Palace.
Yeah, out of Buckingham Palace in 1960, probably, was like, I used to serve, my ancestors served coffee to William the Conqueror. Like, no, you didn't. No, you didn't. You didn't serve coffee to anybody.
You did.
You worked at Starbucks and then decided to open up your own coffee shop in 1982.
Yeah.
Like, so I felt like that was such a, like, tourist trap lie. And I thought it was really laughable. So again, I don't have a ton of other, like, specifics that I wrote. Those are just kind of some examples where I just found that the plot was, I guess, maybe about 50% good. And I think that's being kind of generous when you compare it to other, like, really in-depth video games. But I tried to kind of keep it in the context that this is a point-and-click adventure game. This is not a, massive console RPG. This is a point-and-click mystery adventure game geared to a target audience of what, like 10? Ages 10 and up?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and their demographic is typically, girls, young girls. Not that, I mean, Tori knows with the fandom, there are plenty of people of all ages and, people from every size, shape, and all over the world that really
men and women alike.
Yeah, that enjoy this game. And but keeping in mind that is their target demographic, I would say that the story is about 50-50 to kind of meet that demographic, because I think that you have to give some leniency with a point and click mystery game that still, I mean, a lot of those really are, successful, but it kind of feels maybe a lot of the games that used to be, pretty mainstream point and click games on, PC or computer games, have kind of stayed in like elementary school in like the 90s. And so it makes this game feel a bit dated when the story also feels like it's stuck back in that time frame. So I tried to be fair, but I do think that it doesn't hit the mark all the way. So that's why I gave it 1 out of 2.
Okay. So for character, story, and world, for me, out of 2 points, I also gave this 1 point. I really agree with a lot of what Holland said. All of the good pieces that you expect from a game that is presented in this way, which, like you kind of mentioned, games like this should balance kind of like your story, your characters, and then like whatever the actual gameplay is. Like all of that should be kind of balanced. And while I think all of the pieces are there and things make decent sense for the most part, I mean, like you said, there are some like plot holes and like weird moments. I think that the biggest problem that I have with this story and plot is that so many of the plot triggers, and what I mean by that are like events or things you do in game that then unlock the next piece of the story for you. Those triggers are so vague that I found myself more frustrated than immersed while playing this game. I feel like I spent so much time just trying to figure out, how do I make the game do what I want it to do? Because so much of the game, you're gleaning all this information and you're starting to kind of put things together in your head, and you're like, okay, I need Nancy to go talk to so-and-so about this, or I need Nancy to go check out this in this location. And so we actively know that that's what we need to get to. And eventually the game gets you there too, but you have to figure out how to zigzag your way to that point in a way that the game specifically wants you to. And I found a lot of it to be much too vague. I am a huge fan of this series, like Holland said, and it is very, very hard. It's going to be very hard in this episode for me not to sometimes compare to other games in the series. So I apologize for that, but it is going to happen.
Well, but I think it's also allowed because, we allow ourselves to see how well things have been adapted from the source material. And the same way that with a TV show, you want comparison to prior episodes because you're looking for that cohesion.
Right.
I feel like story notes, mechanics, video games that are in a series are, in general, compared to its predecessors.
Yeah, you come to expect the bar that the company sets at its peak.
Right.
And so when things do not get close to the bar that the company is capable of, it becomes starkly noticed. And that happens a lot. One of the examples here in Character Story and World is one thing that is vastly present through a majority of the Nancy Drew series is that a lot of times you will go to a location, pick up a clue, look at something, and Nancy herself will speak to herself. And it's never really, I don't know if she speaks out loud or if it's supposed to be that you're hearing her own thoughts, but Nancy gives a leading comment. Maybe so-and-so would know more about this. I wonder what would happen if I tried to blah, blah, blah with this. Something like that. And there is so many instances in this game, maybe all instances in this game, where something like that would be appropriate and helpful, and it's just completely missing. And I don't know why. Like, what is the reason here? I don't know if part of it is a mechanic I'll talk about with like the in-game hint system, which I don't know if you ever used when you played and I watched you, but I used some during my playthrough, so I'll talk about that. But either way, even leading comments like that, while I think they could technically be like considered a mechanic of the game, I think it also helps in storytelling and world building, especially because the nature of a game like this means that you should be able to put it down and come back to it at a later date. And for some people, that could be weeks or even months apart. And if Nancy gives you little leading comments, some people might say, oh, Nancy's hand-holding too much. Oh, whatever. But for a player like that, or even a player like me, those things help connect dots that I may have forgotten about, or something that we did at the very beginning of the game, and now we're 2/3 through, and we don't realize how they connect. And Nancy helps us connect those things. And so a lot of that is just really missing. And I think it makes the story feel almost like the pieces that you do get echo off of empty walls, because you don't have any of the like supplementary story pieces that a lot of the series gives you and helps that story feel more realistic and more alive. And honestly, for me, gives motivation as a player to continue digging for the story pieces and see. I want to know the details of how this connects. Instead, what we get, instead of those leading comments as Nancy, we get 15-minute conversations with a character that is simply informational and does not make me feel closer to that character in any way. I'll talk about that a little. Well, I guess this is the place to talk about that. I think like you said, the characters are not bad, but they are so one-noted a lot of the time. And there are certain characters where you do get a little bit more backstory, but I don't think it's ever given in enough care. There's not enough care given to make it feel like, okay, now I have some sort of connection with, sympathy for, hatred for this character. It just kind of is like, oh, okay, well now I get why you did it, but it doesn't flesh them out in a way that makes them feel more realistic, perhaps. And I think I am the kind of Nancy player where the number of characters really needs to be balanced. If you are going to give us, let me count characters real quick. Adela, Patrizia, Radek, Merrick, Elka, Oscar, Vladena. That is 7.
Wait, did you miscount?
Nope. Adela.
Oh, Adele. That's what I was
Patrizia, Radek, Merrick, Elka, Vladena, Oscar. That is 7 in-person characters that you have. That's a lot. And then you have 3 or 4 phone characters. Actually, you have Leo too. That's 8. That's 8 in-person characters that you have. And then 3 or 4 phone characters. That is a lot of characters. If you are going to have that many characters, please let me care about them more than I do. I think they should have cut that number from 8 to 4, to be honest, and give me more humanity from them instead of like the means to an end. I don't want my characters to just be a means to an end. And I found that a lot of what could have been humor was like sort of diverted to be just information. And so, I mean, I think that like, I get that like you're trying to solve a mystery. That's your goal here. Okay. So information is your most valuable asset in solving a mystery. But nobody's going to complain if you have 15 seconds where a character just kind of like is silly for a minute and like is genuinely funny. And I also think that Nancy has less humor than she's had in like the like previous games. And so everything just feels like nobody really has their moment to shine. Nobody really shines because there's just too many that we have to keep track of and how everybody fits in and what their means are. And some characters I feel like you said, there's so little like suspicion cast on anybody. And if there is suspicion cast on somebody, it's so fleeting. And then you just kind of like move on, or Nancy moves on. And I never felt like I felt like Nancy felt very naive in this game. Like she did trust too much, where I prefer a Nancy that trusts nobody. And now, you know, this character has to work to get Nancy to like give them, you know, a little bit of information about what's going on or what she's trying to do. And I felt like it was the opposite. I felt like Nancy was just so open with everybody. I mean, like you said, there's that whole moment where she's on the phone with Agent Zane Garrett. She puts him on speakerphone in front of Elka, a suspect. And so it's like, if like, why are you doing this? You know, this is not the Nancy Drew that has like tact and secrecy, and those sorts of things are just missing from her. And so it all just feels echoey to me of like what could have been great. I also think that there's so much expositional conversation and information that there's nothing left for like visual information gathering. And that's something that I think is also lacking. There is lots of things that you can like look at, but so much of the, I guess, scenes or areas give you things to look at that end up not important to you at all. Like, for instance, there's a whole section in the cafe about Kafka. And to my recollection, I don't think that Kafka actually ever really makes any difference on the plot or puzzles or anything like that.
I thought you had to use like his name for something. Like it was like a password or something. Like maybe. Something like that. It was something so minor.
But it still seemed like the emphasis on Kafka made it seem like his like history and like ties in with Prague was going to be a much bigger deal than it ever was. And so it felt like a lot of what you could look at and interact with was just unintentional and unpurposeful. And one thing that I think is so great about previous Nancy games is that everything that you can interact with and look at is intentional. And that's just not the case.
I thought for sure that you were going to be able to go inside the celestial clock or whatever it is.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I thought for sure you were going to have to do something with it. Yeah, the astronomical clock. I thought for sure you're going to have to do something with it. You're going to go inside it. You're going to have to change the time. Like, do something, like, insane with that. Kind of like in The Great Mouse Detective when battle's on Big Ben. Like, I was like, oh, it's going to be, like, some epic, like, finale. It's going to be something with this clock. Nope. Yeah. It's just for a little puzzle of a clock in the coffee shop.
Right.
Like, nothing.
Yeah. So, like I said, it's like all the pieces are there. They're just used and tied together in such a way that just feels unsatisfying in almost every way. And it is disappointing to me as a Nancy fan. So like you said, I think I'm being a little bit generous, but I was trying to be fair because there are other point and click adventure games that, you know, are not as well known, but there are other series out there that are kind of available on Steam and stuff. And they have weak stories sometimes too. And so it's like, you know, like you said, this is not a AAA game. This wasn't made by Ubisoft or Nintendo or whatever. And I'm trying to give it grace because I know that the company is very few people at this point, and I will talk more about that later. But I still know that the capability is there. And so for the wait that we have to wait for this game, why does it feel like something that you produced in just a few months? It should not feel that way if you have spent 4.5 years on this. That's just my opinion. So 1 point out of 2 for me.
All right. Okay, so our next category is mechanics. So total possible score of 2 for video games. Sorry, I'm going to adjust my mic a little bit. So total possible score of 2 for video games. I gave this a 0 out of 2, which may be a little unfair because this game is not completely unplayable. Like, I've heard in, you know, video game lore that like the Atari ET game was so bad you literally couldn't play it. It's not that bad. But in my opinion, for a 2024 computer game, it's pretty close. So, and what I mean by that, I'll explain. So, excuse me. So, exactly kind of what you said about how Nancy doesn't give you any cues in the story, or like maybe this item in your inventory would be beneficial for this, that, or the other. That I contributed to the mechanics of this game because, in my opinion, when I pick up a game to play it, if I'm not going for 100% completion of finding like every little tiny thing, or like, you know, like I've played Breath of the Wild and Zelda, and I'm playing through Red Dead Redemption 2 right now, and like these huge sandbox game with tons and tons and tons of side quests you can do. Like, I'm not going for 100% completion, but I can make it through the plot without needing to look something up online, looking at a strategy guide. I can just experience the game on my own and use my own brain to figure it out. And that, to me, is what I think that's the standard for every video game. Even if it's like some game like Celeste or Cuphead, where it's trial and error and you're, you know, it's designed to be mechanically difficult so that you have to repeat and try again. Like, it's still, I don't need to look anything up for information. I'm just, maybe mechanically I need to get used to a rhythm or used to a routine or find a different route. Like, because some of those games are designed to be repetitive. But a story-based game, I should be able to move myself through the plot of the game and through the main overarching story without any assistance. And that is not possible in this game, in my opinion. I'm sure there are lots of people that have done it, so kudos to you guys. But I am not I don't consider myself a gamer per se. I love video games. I enjoy them very much. But I don't consider myself a gamer. I'm not, you know, the best, you know, technically at video games. But I think that a mystery game based on the Nancy Drew mystery series, which are beloved, but the game is designed as a point and click mystery game for ages 10 and up. I should be able to figure this out. Like, I'm older than 10. Like, I should be able to just start it and get through it. And maybe there might be parts where it's hard or I can't figure it out, but something in the game that I could go back to and click every little tiny thing. There should be something I could click on, or like you said, like an in-game hint that would connect me or lead me to the next step in the game. And that just, frankly, in my experience playing through this game, doesn't exist. And I think that is a huge discredit to a video game. Like, to me, if you can't mechanically navigate your way through it unassisted, just the main story basics, I think you've got a problem there. Yeah, so like the triggers for this next story moment are extremely picky. Same thing with the puzzles. You start doing a puzzle, there's no explanation of what this puzzle is for, what the objective of this puzzle is. Is there a piece missing that I need to get first before I can start this puzzle? All of those things have always been present in Nancy Drew games, and they just are non-existent in this game. So I might be sitting and looking at a puzzle on the wall of a cave, or looking at some bookshelves on a bookcase or something, and I'm just sitting there staring at it, just clicking anything and everything, and nothing's happening. Well, it turns out I needed to find a missing book to put on the shelf, or I needed to find a missing piece to insert into this spot that doesn't really look like an empty spot. But there's normally Nancy would say something to the effect of, I don't have all the pieces yet, or something like that. Or another character would have already handed it to you before you could even find it.
Right.
And you would know, you'd see it in your inventory that they match. Something like that. That's just non-existent. So many of the puzzles, I had no idea. Like, for example, this is just an example because I don't remember every single puzzle in this game. But for example, if it's like a grid and you have to connect a path from point A to point B across the grid, like moving the squares or illuminating the squares, some puzzles like that, you have to illuminate every square.
Right.
Some puzzles, you just have to connect a path. There are two kinds of puzzles in this game that I would say mirror those two mechanical structures, and Nancy never tells you, do I have to illuminate everything? Do I have to just connect this? Do I have to light the letters up? Do I have to make the mirrors bounce things around? Like, those are really common puzzles that should deserve a really common explanation, and we're never given one. We're not given any instructions. There's not even text on a screen, let alone a voiceover.
Right.
And to me, that is just such a detriment, because this game, I would say, is a point-and-click mystery game and a lot of them are very puzzle-heavy games. And all of the puzzles in this game, in my experience, were just trial and error. And if you figure it out, great. And if you don't figure it out, well, you're just going to be stuck on it, or you have to look something up online. And because there's no like official strategy guide for this game, and there's not any, the game is still really new. I can't imagine playing it on release, which I think you did. Like, I can't imagine playing it on release and you can't even find like a Reddit thread of people because it's so new.
Her Interactive released at the time of the game the strategy guide, which was a PDF that you download when you download the game. However, it is literally just an answer key. And so it's hard to use it if you don't want to be spoiled, or if you just need a little bit of help, because as soon as you find that section, it's just like, here's how you do this, blah, 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 blah.
And it gives you the step by step.
Basically.
Yeah. So I just feel like that's just a real problem with this game. And the fact that, I mean, again, like, this is for ages 10 and up, and I'm well above the age of 10, and I'm struggling to figure it out. Or maybe like there was something, like Tori watched me play through this game, and there were parts where I'm like clicking on stuff, trial and error, and Tori told me, oh, you have to touch this piece, or you have to, click on this specific spot. And I'm like, I would never have figured that out.
And the only reason I know that is because I spent grueling hours, sometimes like pixel hunting in a scene, which again, I will talk about, but
yeah. So to me, that's just terrible. There's no guidance on how to complete puzzles, mini games. There's no instructions for the puzzles. With the puppets, that puzzle I actually liked, but again, there was no instructions. Nothing told you, what do I have to do? You literally are just starting a puzzle, a mini game, a puzzle, and it's just like, here it is. Like, and Tori had to tell me, okay, you have to match this person with what they said and what object, and but does there have to be an object in every used? Can you use something more than once? Like, nothing, no explanation. And it's not even like, oh, well, if you exit that window and walk around to the other side, there's an instruction book that tells you. No, there's literally no in-game guide whatsoever on how to complete things. And to me, that's just terrible. The other mechanical issue I really had was the general game navigation. So Tori's going to touch on this. I'm not trying to steal her thunder, but there's two different ways you can play this game. Is kind of like your traditional point and click where it's a static image and you click the mouse at different parts of the frame to move. Tori played with that mechanic. I played with the newer navigation. Modern, where you use the arrow keys or the WASD keys on the keyboard to move, forward, backward, left, right. And then you use the mouse to navigate the camera, kind of like more of a what is now, I would say, a conventional PC first-person maneuver. I guess you could say that. Don't hate me, gamers. I'm not a gamer. I just self-identified as not being a gamer. So that's how I used it, but it feels so dated. It feels so dated when you're using the mechanics that I used. It feels like, I don't know if you remember, I do, because when our first computer was like a hand-me-down computer. And so it was like the dinosaur of computers. It was like one of the first computers ever made. It was a gateway computer. Like that's how old it was. Yeah, it was massive. And somebody gave it to us. That's the only reason we had a computer in the home when I was growing up. And it had you probably remember, it had the old maze game with the brick walls, and you had to like navigate through it and like find the switches to push, and it would open a gate and so that game was punishing. It was so difficult. Of course it doesn't save, so like you just have to do it all in one sitting. That's what the navigation felt like in this game. It felt that like stilted. The movements weren't fluid unless you had the sensitivity turned all the way up, and then you're just like any like slight movement of the mouse and your head is just, I feel so bad. I'm not sensitive to motion sickness, but I can't imagine people that are. Like, this game should come with a warning. Like, it will literally make you nauseous if you don't turn the sensitivity down. And again, there's no way that tells you how to turn the sensitivity down. So if that's your only experience, you don't know how to adjust the controls. What would be nice is almost
to have like when you first start up a game, to have like a sensitivity test where it takes you through almost like a tutorial until something feels comfy, and then it sets it for you.
Right. A lot of console games now do that. Exactly. Like, they let you adjust the darkness or brightness before you even start the game, things like that. Or if you want to toggle on or off, like color sensitivity, movement sensitivity, subtitles, like all of that. Now, a lot of console games let you toggle that stuff on and off before you even start the game.
Right.
So you can enjoy the experience. And that's my biggest thing. The biggest reason I gave this a 0 was because a video game, by definition, is supposed to be fun.
Right.
I'm supposed to enjoy myself, and nothing in these mechanics made this game enjoyable. It, in fact, did the exact opposite. And so I feel like if you are not having fun by playing a game, then you've missed the mark. You've completely missed the mark. And your mechanics should be the last thing to cause you frustration in a game like this, of this style and genre. Again, like a game like, maybe Cuphead or Celeste or something like that, that's designed for you to have to repeat the same thing over and over and over again as you kind of hone your reaction time or your skills or find the right path to navigate or get better.
Dark Souls.
Yeah. A game that's designed like that, you go in with that expectation, and you're like,
all right, marketed to you as such.
Right, I'm ready to grind it out. That's the point of this game, is to grind it out and have that satisfaction of achievement at the end. That's not this game. And so I can't even give credit for, it was a really punishing game, because that wasn't the point.
Right.
That wasn't the point of this game. Right. So that's the biggest reason. I had a couple specifics, like the coffee foam. The whole mini game was terrible. That was especially miserable with the mechanics. And then anything in the tunnels, again, the mechanics of that were just horrible. Those were kind of the two specifics, but just in general, kind of my overview of the mechanics, I think they're just abysmal in this game, because they take all the fun They take all the fun away from the whole point of playing a video game, which is to enjoy it. So 0 out of 2.
Okay, so for mechanics, for me, out of 2 points, I gave this half a point. A lot of what you said is true, and it's so unfortunate. So Nancy Drew, for years, for 20 5+ years has been a point and click adventure game. Why is your point and click mode absolutely atrocious? It's awful, and it's honestly a disservice to all fans who prefer that kind of game style.
Oh yeah, definitely.
If your loyal fans that have been playing Nancy Drew since 1998 when Secrets Can Kill were released, those loyal fans go in,
which was not Tori's 10th birthday, by the way. So
no,
don't,
I wasn't.
So you don't have
I was
to
not
think
yet
that
10.
You can't guess her age. She was not 10.
I was not 10 that year. But your fans that have been playing your entire series, they're sitting down. I'm ready to play the new Nancy Drew point and click game. They click point and click, and now they're being punished for that choice because so many absolutely necessary scenes, items, etc., are only visible to you if you point and click and then you swing the camera around. And it's like, no, there should be a nice little arrow that directs me to turn myself. I shouldn't have to manually swing the camera around. That's not what point and click is. So this game is, I think, a little more playable in modern mode, but as Holland talked about, is still not great.
No.
And it still does not feel intuitive to the type of game that's here. It felt like we are a Nancy Drew game, but we are going to make it like Skyrim. Well, guess what? Skyrim is a completely different game, and it presents things completely differently. It is not a point and click mystery heavy puzzle game, and that's what Nancy Drew is. So I feel like you can't use the mechanics for something else that's popular and just slap it over your product. It doesn't work like that. You need to find and stick with the mechanics that work for your product. They mastered this in the series and then decided to change it. And I understand they want to keep up with the times, but if I'm completely honest with you, I think the majority of Nancy Drew fans don't care if your game feels like Skyrim. They want their Nancy Drew game to feel like a Nancy Drew game. Well, and that's it. And then we're happy.
Well, and I think the fact that games like Detective Grimoire are proof that there is still a market for point and click games.
Yeah, exactly. So I know I'm being really harsh, and I've talked about this. I've talked about Mystery of the Seven Keys online in other places too. So I know that my opinions are very clear. But I think that if you're just click boxes and navigation are so unnatural that if you have to pixel hunt on a screen for something that's not an Easter egg, then why? Why am I being punished for trying to find this thing?
I feel like looking in your own inventory is pixel hunting because it's so tiny.
It is. I also think the text boxes are really small.
Yeah.
And I think that for anybody who's got perhaps that might be hard vision issues, perhaps need bigger. I think that accessibility should be an option for fans.
Yeah.
I don't have necessarily bad vision. I mean, I wear contacts, so I guess without those I have really bad vision. But I would like the option to maybe have bigger text. And
the read inventory. The read feature is horrible. It looks like it was haphazardly put together at the last minute, and it doesn't. It's at times difficult to read and decipher things through that too. So you could argue that they have a read option. Well, yeah, but it doesn't give you a true visual of what you're actually looking at. If a paper that you're reading has is a table with numbers on it, well, that doesn't help me out at all because the formatting doesn't translate. Right.
I agree. There are in-game hints. I want to talk about that a little bit because I don't think you used those at all.
I didn't.
So in the checklist that's in-game, you have an item and then there's a little square question mark box by a lot of those things. I will say they are incredibly unhelpful for most of the time. I had to use quite a lot of them, which I tried really hard not to. I tried to just use my brain, but like you mentioned, so much of it is like unintuitive, and I'm like, I don't know how I would know to do that for this or whatever. But I did use some of the in-game hints and still found myself very lost, because it would give you kind of like a vague leading, which is what I want Nancy to do. But then if I try to do that vague leading, I haven't triggered that yet. So it doesn't actually help or whatever. So I found myself frustrated even with the in-game hint system, which is why I really didn't recommend that you use it when we played it together for your prep for this, because it's really not that helpful anyway, unfortunately. I think that the reason I gave it half a point is because I do think quite a few of the puzzles are good. They're good puzzles that are, clever. I think there's a bunch of different kinds of puzzles. It's not always the same. There are a few puzzles that you do more than once, but they're like slightly different or slightly harder, so I accept it. But it is the start of every puzzle that's the problem. If I don't know what I'm looking at or what my goal is, how do I know what I'm doing with this puzzle? If I at least know what I'm trying to do, I can figure out how to get there. But it's throwing something at Nancy and then no direction or help whatsoever. Like, at least with the coffee puzzle, Patrizio was like, here's the things. And then there were like little boxes that popped up. It's like, steam your milk here, get your espresso here. Like, at least that puzzle had like those. Why didn't we use that for a bunch of other things? We could have. It wouldn't have been super difficult.
The latte art.
Difficult.
Horrible.
I cried the first time. I literally
tears?
stopped. Yeah, I got so frustrated. The first night that I was playing Mystery of the Seven Keys, I got to latte art. I got so frustrated. I cried. I went, ah! And my mother said, because we always play Nancy Drew together. That's like our tradition when a new Nancy Drew came. And my mother said, I think it's time for us to go to bed tonight. And I was like, yeah. So I did. Oh, I remember what I was going to talk about. Guess what I discovered, or we discovered? You can't save the game during mini puzzles. What the heck? You're telling me I got to sit through this 25 to 30 minute puppet puzzle, which is a good puzzle. I'm not saying it's a bad puzzle, but You're telling me that if I start this puzzle, I can't back away or save until it's done.
Yeah. Yeah.
What if I don't have that kind of time?
That's right. We had to reload the autosave.
The autosave, because I had to go to work. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I have to go. We don't have time to do this puzzle. And so I don't like anything that I can't have control of when I stop. If I do not have control of when I stop, I get frustrated. Like, no, you're not going to do that to me for a point and click puzzle game. I get to control that, not you.
Yep.
So, yeah, the mechanics are hard, and I think that if this was the first Nancy Drew game for somebody, I think it would turn them off to the entire series.
Yeah, I think so too.
I would have to convince you that the others in the series are not like this. Like, this is not the bulk of the series. I promise you that there are better mechanically built games than this game. Please continue to play the series. Yeah. Please continue to play the series. It is not this frustrating all the time.
It's such a disappointment. Sorry, I stuttered. It's such a disappointment because you would expect somebody to warn you with the first game.
Right.
Not the newest game.
I genuinely think that in regards to mechanics, this is about on par with the first couple Nancy Drew games, which were made in the 90s. That's bad.
Yeah.
So anyway, half a point out of 2 for mechanics for me.
All right. Next category for video games is aesthetics. I really went back and forth on this. So total possible score of 2, just like every category in this specific topic of video games. I really struggled with aesthetics because on the one hand, this is not Skyrim, Red Dead Redemption, whatever other newest Sony game. I mean, it's not even like the Amazing Spider-Man 2, which came out this year for Sony. It's not your highest quality like Assassin's Creed game. It's not stylized like a Nintendo game. It's not even like Breath of the Wild quality, which you could argue is not the best graphics when you compare to some of these like beefier graphical consoles like a Sony console or an Xbox or Microsoft or PC, even PC gaming, things like that. So, again, if I didn't hit your fandom, don't hate me. I'm not a gamer. But so if you're comparing apples to oranges there, or even apples to apples there, it would be like a 0.5, maybe a 0, because the aesthetics of this are just not that par. So I tried to view this again with the kind of the same lens of like, okay, this is a point and click mystery game. It's a very small company. It's kind of an indie, I would say an indie company at this point. This isn't a AAA game like you'd mentioned. And its target demographic is 10 and up of a kind of point and click game. So because of that, I feel like you can give it some leniency with the aesthetics, with the visuals, but it still didn't, I don't think that it met the standard of its own game and its own genre. So because of that, I know that was a big lead in. I gave this 1 out of 2 points. I don't think it matches the visual standards of some prior Nancy Drew games. So if you're comparing it to cohesion across its own
series
library, no, it's not the best looking game in the series by any means, I don't think. It's also not the worst looking game in the series because it is, graphics and computer graphics have improved since the game series first started. But I also don't think it is the best standard of visuals when you compare it to visuals of other games in this genre that are not from its own company. So, there's some point and click adventure games. I remember, I don't know if it's even a company anymore, but there was Big Fish Games was a company. It was kind of more like a find the hidden object game, or there was one I downloaded for the Switch before because it was really cheap. It was like Grim Tales of something, like it was a point and click, like hidden object.
Still kind of exists.
Yeah, so
the Agatha Christie games.
Yeah, so games like that, which are just kind of fun, relaxing. To me, they're relaxing. Like point and click games that sometimes I'll just play when I'm like, I just want something a little mindless to do. Some of those games have better graphics than this game, and not even considering this took 4 years to develop, but just in its own category and in comparing to other games of its genre, it doesn't have the best graphics. I think that the animation overall is okay. The NPCs, like I guess they technically are NPCs. Like your main characters, they do each have kind of a distinct looking style. They look like they were designed with a lot of thought. That they were conceptualized with a lot of thought. The area of Prague looks pretty good. It looks like, they tried to capture the visual feel of Prague, with the cathedral, and the coffee shop feels like a coffee shop. This town square with the astronomical clock, it all feels like we are in the city of Prague. We are in Europe. We are in Eastern Europe, and it feels like we are where we're supposed to be. It doesn't feel like they just took a cookie cutter template from a prior game and just changed the paint color and sold it to us as a different visual layout. So again, but it still kind of feels like the plot. It's like the bones were there, and like they started out good, and then it just wasn't executed very well. The animation when people move did feel a little bit laggy. Again, that could change based on what kind of computer processing system you're using. Maybe people that played it on Steam or people that played it on, a more high-powered gaming computer had some more success with that. But I personally felt like it was a little bit laggy. The one thing with the characters, like the voice acting wasn't terrible. There were parts where it felt like some of the characters were just speaking very like stilted and like they were like bad acting. I hate to say that because it wasn't like that overall, but it sounded like there were some moments where maybe it was like a rushed ADR or something, rushed like what's it called, like pickup shots, but it's pickup lines. The part where Radek, who's the young man, he comes in speaking, what is it, Czech that they speak? He comes in speaking Czech, and he says it with a great accent, and then he starts speaking English, and he has no accent whatsoever. I was like, this just doesn't sound right. And they try and like explain it away with a throwaway line, but I'm like, everybody else has an accent. Why do you not have an accent? It sounds like the voice actor rehearsed those like few Czech lines with an accent, or maybe they got somebody else to record it speaking Czech because he couldn't, and then he just spoke in his normal voice. Things like that, where there's just a lot of disconnect between the voice acting that kind of pulled me out of that immersion of the game. I know that Nancy Drew's original voice actor is not the voice actor in this game. I think that this Nancy does a pretty good job with what she's given. I don't have any personal vendetta against this new actor because she's not the original actor, but I think she does a good job. I think she sounds fine. I know that's kind of a big point of contention with some of the fans of the original series, and but she lacks a lot of what the original voice actor brought to the character. She kind of feels more like just a very generic young female protagonist. She doesn't feel like she's emoting with any distinct personality like to Nancy Drew.
Brittany Cox, that's the voice actress. I think her take on Nancy is different, and I don't dislike her either. But to me, it feels very like corporate Nancy. Like it's very corporate Nancy. It's not quite as like, I don't know. The sass is different. The humor is different. It's just packaged differently. And I think it probably just comes down to preference for a lot of fans. But I kind of classify her take on Nancy as very like corporate Nancy.
She's kind of like PR Nancy.
Yeah.
Yeah. She just feels like she's kind of cleaned up, very no nonsense, not really a lot of personality. And again, I don't think that's on the actress. I think that's on just the direction that they're trying to take this game. And I feel like it gives you less connection to your protagonist. And maybe that's kind of what they were going for. Maybe they were trying to go for more of a blank slate character, so that because you are Nancy Drew, so anybody could be Nancy. Like she's not this like super sassy person if you're not a sassy person. But I feel like that misses the mark of kind of the point of playing as a character. It's like, again, I'm not trying to compare, but like playing the character of Link in The Legend of Zelda, he has zero personality.
Right.
But that's really not true, because his character has some like backstory or arc or depth. And
plus you do see Link for most games, and you don't see Nancy as you play as her.
Right.
So you get a lot of like
visual
like emotion and expressions and stuff from a character like Link.
Right. So I don't think that that's really an exactly like you said. So because of that, because you don't see Nancy, the only information you have about her is her voice.
Right.
And so they just don't give you a whole lot of information about her. So I'm not really invested in this protagonist and playing as this protagonist. A couple other things. I think some of the cinematic cutscenes, it's like, this is a cinematic cutscene, but it's like it's not from Nancy's point of view, because we're watching something that Nancy's not present for.
Right.
And so where that I think is very good for storytelling, works very well opening you into a game, I don't understand why that happened in like the very middle of a game.
Yeah.
And I think that makes some disconnect, because, well, is Nancy there watching it and I'm seeing this because I'm her? Or did this happened off screen, but I get to see it? It just didn't make a whole lot of sense. I think where this game really falls short, though, and this is going to sound like it's not a big deal, but I think it is a big deal, is in the sound design and the music of this game. the score is extremely repetitive. I think there's like, from what I could like discern, it sounded like there were like 3 tracks in the entire game and they just repeated over and over and over again. It was so stale. I got so tired of hearing the same like few measures of a score over and over and over again. It didn't change based on your location. It didn't change on your, based on what you were looking at, except maybe the ghost tour kind of changed a little bit. But otherwise, the score was super bland, which I think Tori may mention this is not typical for Nancy Drew's standard.
At one point, Holland was like, "Is this the same score as Warnings at Waverly Academy?" And I was like, "No." And you were like, "Yeah, it is." And I was like, "It's not, but I can see why you would think that."
Yeah, it doesn't sound like any music that's unique to Prague. It doesn't sound like any music that's unique to the type of mystery you're looking into. Is just super, super bland. And then I also had a huge problem with the sound design as well. The fact that when you're walking around, there's no ambient noise at all. You're in a coffee shop and all you're listening to is the score. There's no people talking at low voices. There's no like sound of plates or glasses clinking. You're walking across the square. There's no like people chattering that are around you. There's no there's no ambient noise whatsoever. It's like they ran out of it in their budget and they just didn't have any filler sound to make you feel like you're immersed in the world. And again, I think it's really important for a game where you don't see your main protagonist, so you don't have that extra visual to connect you into the world. You're fully relying on your character's, the protagonist's voice, and then any ambient sound. If you're looking through her lenses, then you should expect to hear what she hears, but she apparently doesn't hear anything. Also, like these weird dust bunnies that float around, like I don't understand what's up with that. The lighting, there were some moments where that got a little weird. The fact that the NPCs like placed in the town square are in like really weird positions, like not in that the NPCs are like posed in a weird way, but that just where they're standing, it's like, why would you stand? 2 people would stand there. And like the one of the puzzles where you have to find, like you're using the old pager and like beeping around. Why is every single location that I have to touch in front of NPCs? Like I'm all up in their personal bubble space, but like this is where I'm supposed to be. That was just ridiculous. Like why would we put the NPCs there? And that doesn't make sense. Like Nancy's just like rolling up to, excuse me, guys, I'm gonna sit in your lap while I figure out what this clue is. Like no, it was just ridiculous. But again, I think that there are parts where it's not terrible. But overall, it's really not, there's nothing that's notably good. It's just completely forgettable. The visuals of this game, this like what you're looking at and hearing, it's just completely forgettable. And I think that's pretty sad when you have a game set in a new location that hasn't been seen before. You're supposed to be like, feel like you're traveling to this exciting place. And yet this exciting place kind of feels like a weird shopping mall that nobody is in. And I feel like that would have been a more exciting location than what they made Prague look like. So that's why I gave it half a point. One other thing that just really I couldn't stand.
I thought you gave it 1 point out of 2 for aesthetics.
What did I say?
You just said half a point.
Half credit. 1 point out of 2. Half credit. One part of the game that really just I thought I was gonna just have to turn the game off because it was so irritating is when you're in the dean's office and the cat is meowing constantly while you're trying to do a puzzle. I thought I was gonna lose my dang mind. Like I'm a bit of like an auditory learner. I'm not exactly, but I have some like auditory learning. And so while I'm trying to concentrate, something meowing in my ear at loud volume, it's not background noise, at loud volume was so distracting for me. I mean, I could have just muted the game, like first world problems. But still, I shouldn't have to if your sound design was done a little better. But 1 out of 2 for aesthetics for me.
Okay. For me, for aesthetics out of 2 points, I only gave this half a point. Yeah. So,
Sorry, I was muted.
oh,
I went, ooh.
yeah. So, I do like a lot of the landscapes and areas that they have created. I think that as far as the visuals go for the locations, I think everything is built as it should be. I think that it's a lot of the detail is where kind of things go wrong. So the ambient noise is a big thing for me that you mentioned. The NPCs, I went into the menu and cranked down the NPC generator as low as it would go, so that the fewest amount of people would be like hanging around, because to me, I found them distracting. And I just did not like it. It did not add to the game for me because there's not sound to like back them up. So it felt weird to have all these very silent people just like standing around to me. I think it's unfortunate that so many of the landscapes and areas look good, for the fact that all of those areas are kind of unused. Like, so many of the nice areas are unused. And I know you kind of talked about this earlier, but like, this astronomical clock is so cool. Why couldn't we have more with that? I want more with that. I want to be able to go. I would have loved to walk into the cathedral and see like the auditorium.
Yeah.
And like those sorts of things. Like, the cathedral is this huge, beautiful building from the outside. I want to go inside. Like, I felt like they put all this effort into the facade of these really cool things. And they're just underutilized, I guess, is the best term that I can come up with.
Yeah, now that you mention it, like, the entire game takes place like,
it's courtyard, cafe, museum / jewelry store, because they're both in the same area, operaat, tunnels. That's it.
Yeah.
That's all of it.
Yeah, and all of the in between is just getting from one of those places to the other. Yeah,
it's just liminal space.
Which I think, kind of like what you mentioned with this being a point and click game, it makes the square completely unnecessary.
It does.
It doesn't need to be as large as it is.
It's also confusing because in the menu, you are given a map of the two sections of outside that you can walk between. And the way that the map is presented for the part, I don't remember which part is which, but the part of the square that like operaat is in, the way the map is presented to you, it's very large. It seems like you should be able to walk past where those barricades are, but they like didn't actually finish that area maybe, so now you can't. So that was disappointing for me, because I thought at multiple points during the game that like something would happen and then that area would open up to me and I'd get more to explore. And it's just never actually fulfilled. So it seems like, again, just underutilization of what you've already created. The score, I don't necessarily think the songs are bad, but I fully agree that they get really boring really fast. I also hate the way that the songs transition. Sometimes they transition on top of each other like this, and it sounds so jarring. And I'm like, at least the songs are so close to each other that like it doesn't feel like super shifty. But when two songs are suddenly playing on top of each other for a few seconds while Nancy's like changing locations or something, like, it always made me like cringe a little bit, because I'm like, why are two songs playing at once? And I think that the character models are fine, but they still don't look polished. And I think that maybe if I had a super beefy desktop that can like play everything at like super high FPS, that like some of that would be better for me. But we're talking Nancy Drew, a small indie company, Her Interactive. How much of your fan base is willing to upgrade to a computer setup like that to really get the, bang for their buck? It's going to be hard for a majority of your audience, especially if this is the kind of game that those people primarily play. I don't play a lot of beefy games on my PC. I play primarily point and clicks. Like, it's just the kind of thing that I think I feel best doing on my computer. So
which you would expect would need a low processing speed.
Right. And so I would imagine I'm not alone in the Nancy Drew community with that sort of mindset. I'm sure there are plenty in the community that do PC game a lot and, you know, have chunkier computers, but it's not going to be everybody. I would wager.
Well, and their demographic is not hardcore PC gamers.
Right. And so, you know, while there are people in the community where that overlaps, it's not all of us. And so I think to present a game and you say, by the way, if you want this to look good, you need to go buy a $3,000 computer. Like, that's just not a fair ask of a lot of your community. And sometimes, I don't want to say that this is always the case, but sometimes I think you need to keep in mind, like, try to find that lowest common denominator where everybody in your community can enjoy something. And maybe that's part of the mechanics, but I think that a lot of times this is just like the rendering of the aesthetics that I'm kind of talking about. You can change the resolution, which I think can be helpful, but because of something I mentioned earlier with kind of like the small text boxes and small inventory box, if you lower the resolution in order to play it better, that may also hurt your ability to read and inspect things close enough. And so it's kind of like the gamble you have to play. Like, where's the sweet spot for each person? One thing that I found in this game is that everything aside from the tunnels and perhaps Apparat, because Apparat is basically two very different halves of one shop, a lot of the rest of the game gives the same mood throughout the whole thing. I struggled to figure out if I thought that this was a detriment or a benefit, because some people, including myself, could argue that's cohesion. You know, that's cohesive. However, I think that this went past cohesion and just went into kind of like the samey, bland category for me. I think it was I'm still kind of struggling with how I feel about it, because I do like a game that has a cohesive mood. I think that games should kind of have an overall cohesive mood. But I also think that if you're going to underutilize your space, your areas need to be more distinct. And so I think if we have the problem here in this game of underutilization of space and area, then I need them to be a little bit different and I need them to be a little more distinct. And I think that's where I'm grappling. I think if they had utilized all of the space and given us more areas or something like that, then we would have naturally been given more of like mood changes. I think that that's perhaps just where it lies. That balance is that, you know, we didn't use it, so we didn't have it. And I think if they had used the space, they would have had sort of like those changes in like mood, lighting, even color scheme. Like, you know, you just want areas that just kind of feel a little different than the rest. And so obviously the tunnels are going to be different. And like I said, Apparat is sort of presented to you as two very different sides of one business. But the square feels so much like the museum, which feels so much like the cafe, which feels so much like the alleyway, you know, so it's like
even the dean's office.
Yeah, it just feels very much the same. It's all a lot of like browns and bricks and things like that. And you know, if that's the aesthetic of Prague, I'm not asking them to change what would be true about the area, but just, I don't know, just give me a little bit more. I'm starting to feel a little stale by the time we get to the end of the game. So because of that, I think it was really hard for me to give it even a full point, because I just think that while I can tell that they're making the effort to make the game look good, it's just not, it's not supported in a way. And I know that I'm just ranking aesthetics here, but I think that as with anything, all categories sort of support each other. And I think because the aesthetics themselves have no support, they don't hold up enough on their own to make me satisfied. So that's why I'm just giving it half of a point out of 2.
I think that's fair. I think that's very fair. All right, so our next category, as always, our second to last category is personal taste and preference. And as always, we are limited to 2 points for this. So out of a total possible score for personal taste, I gave this 0 out of 2, which is kind of sad because I didn't really want to have to give this a 0 out of 2. To be fair, overall, I didn't hate playing this game. However, I played this game with Tori as my personal walkthrough. If I got stuck, Tori was watching me play she watched me play the whole game. We played it together. We've played a lot of Nancy Drew games together, so we enjoy it. But because of that, I had Tori right there. If I got stuck, she could just tell me what to do, and I didn't have to look anything up or get frustrated for too long. But if I was playing this game blind, I would have quit very quickly. And I personally didn't really enjoy the story or the gameplay. I also don't think I would recommend the game, as I think in general it gives a bad impression of Nancy Drew, kind of like you mentioned in the past. So it's not a game I would ever pick up and play again. I don't think it has anything to offer as far as replayability goes. I don't think it really has anything to offer as is, which sounds really sad to say, but that's just in my taste. Like, if this wasn't like a Nancy Drew game, and I know Tori loves Nancy Drew and I've enjoyed playing Nancy Drew games with her, like if I had watched like a 30-second clip of somebody playing this game, I would be like, yeah, not for me. It's a kind of a cheap, game. But especially in playing it and kind of going back to what I said about mechanics, like the fact that the structure and mechanics of this game, I think they remove all fun from the game. And for that, I would absolutely not pick it up. So I would say personally, I think this game, just on my list of things that I enjoy, if I didn't have Tori helping me through the game, I would have quit the game. I would have been like, this game is too hard. It's not fun. I'm not enjoying it. Yeah, I wouldn't have finished it. So, I mean, because to me, the alternative would be, okay, I'm going to look up a strategy guide that's just going to give me every answer. Mm-hmm. So why is that fun? I'm just now plugging and playing.
Right.
So 0 out of 2.
For me, for personal taste and preference, out of 2 points, I only gave this half a point. And that's really hard for me to like even admit. I love Nancy Drew. It is a series that I am very attached to, and I'm getting emotional right now just talking about it. And it's been so much of my life for so long. And when I finished this game with my mom, the credits rolled and I shut my laptop down and I cried. And it was because I had this like moment where I realized that I don't know if this series is ever going to be what it was when I grew up and like what I had come to love so much. And then Nancy Drew games, like I love other game series too. It's not like Nancy Drew is like my game series and so there's nothing left for me to play in this world. It's not like that, but it is a series that I have followed. The only series in my life that I have ever followed longer than Nancy Drew is Pokemon. And so to have something that I'm so attached to feel so empty and unsatisfying to play is really hard for me to like come to terms with and come to grips with. It hurts and like I know that may sound dramatic to somebody who might be watching or listening to this, but like as a fan, it hurt to like kind of come to that realization. And so like I pray that there would be a better future for the series because it's not the games. And I know some people are going to say like, 34 games in a series is a lot for any fan. You should be thankful. And I am in a way, I'm grateful that I have so many games to choose from in this series, and I'm grateful that they have even tried to make this many. So I don't want to sound completely ungrateful as a fan. But it's just the realization of like things changing the way I don't want them to. And for some fans, maybe the change is positive. For some fans, maybe they feel like I do, and it's not, it feels almost like I'm like it's distancing itself from me. like in a way, a weird way, it kind of feels like a breakup of like something that like I had so much attachment to and treated me so well. And now it's not treating me well anymore. And so now I'm like, where do I stand in regards to like my connection with the series, with the company that makes them, with the community around it? Like it just feels weird. Like I feel weirdly lonely sometimes, like in the community. And I know that I'm not really, you know, I'm sure there are plenty of people out in the community that feel like I do. And, you know, there are people that I've talked to in the community that have different opinions than me on this game and still acknowledge that like they completely understand and think that what my opinions are like valid for me in my perspective. So I know that I'm not necessarily alone, but like in that moment of like finishing the game and feeling like that couldn't be it. Like it couldn't be it. It was just so hard for me for some reason. And I know I'm kind of yapping a little bit about that, but I think it's simply because the half point that I give it for personal taste and preference is simply because of my love and loyalty to the series and not necessarily in any way for this specific game. And so I am feeling sort of tossed about in the seas of the Nancy Drew series right now. And so kind of the, I guess, conclusion I've come to as a fan is I'm just going to keep clinging to the games previous in the series that I love. And, you know, I'll give it a try. If they keep, you know, making them, I'll keep trying them. I don't think I'm necessarily going to give up. But I'm also not going to keep like putting all of my nostalgia into the hopes of the future, if that makes sense. I don't think that's necessarily fair to me to do that to myself, and I don't think it's necessarily fair to Her Interactive as a company because the company has changed so drastically in the last 10 years. So my expectations of them may not be fair anymore, and I want to acknowledge that too. So that was a long spiel. I'm sorry. But I wanted to kind of explain that as somebody who has been in the community online for so many years and has been playing these games for so many years. So 0.5 point out of 2 for personal taste.
Sad. Do you feel better?
I do. Like,
getting that off your chest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tori's been having like the stages of grief.
Yeah.
Nancy Drew.
And every time I talk about it, I feel like I get worked up a little bit, but...
Oh, sad. So, last category for video games, and this is the one time where we have the category of creativity is allotted... Sorry. The category of creativity is allotted 2 points instead of 1 for video games because video games have such a high potential to be extremely, extremely creative. For this game, I gave this 0 out of 2. So, I think that you could argue one way or the other, but for this game specifically, and again, I am scoring this game. I'm not scoring the Nancy Drew video game series as a whole. For this specific game, I gave it 0 out of 2. I think maybe you could argue that, you know, maybe you could give more points if you take into consideration Nancy Drew's video game series, all 34 games in the series. However, for this game, I think that for a character so beloved, which Nancy Drew has been around since how long?
1930.
Yeah. So since the Great Depression, for a character so beloved and a game series with such a surprisingly long history, and I would call it a cult following. You fans may not want to say that you're a cult following.
I would say that's very accurate as a fan of Nancy Drew.
I would say that's my perspective of it, is that it's got such a long history. Like you said, 34 games is a long history. And with a cult following, this game doesn't really do anything for either of those. So it doesn't do anything for Nancy Drew as a character. It doesn't do anything for the game series as a video game, as an addition to the existing series, and it doesn't do anything to give something new to the fandom itself. It'd be one thing if the fans were like, all we've ever wanted was a game about Prague. And the Nancy Drew company said, all right, we've been thinking about folding in the towel and closing our doors, and we had a good run, but this is for the fans. Then, what? I could cut them some slack.
Yeah.
I could say, what? The fans wanted this, and this is what they're doing as their big last swan song, and that's what they gave us.
Right.
But they didn't even do that. It's just they're trying to continue on business as usual, and I think it's very lacking in creativity, this game as a whole. That I kind of feel like for the previous categories that I gave credit to, as far as the characters and the story building in the world and the what was the other one? The aesthetics. I think you could argue that the bit of innovation in creating a video game story of a Nancy Drew mystery, I feel like that credit goes into those categories, not into the fact of creativity, because this isn't the first time that a Nancy Drew video game has been made. So I gave it 0 out of 2.
Okay. For creativity, out of 2 points, I also gave this 0 points.
Ooh.
So Her Interactive used to be a company where everything was done in-house. From the conception to the writing to the art to the puzzles to the marketing to the programming, everything was done in-house. That is not true anymore. And this game and its predecessor, Midnight in Salem, was very heavily outsourced. Different aspects of those games. I could not tell you what assets, sections, whatever. I can't tell you who did what. Like, I'm not going to be able to, I don't know, like, what outsourced company did this part or whatever. But I know this game was heavily outsourced, and that's very evident in by the credits of this game. You watch all of these production companies and art studios be listed and all of the people that worked on their section and their chunk. And I think, unfortunately, to the detriment of this game, is all this outsourcing sort of makes this feel like a Frankenstein game. And where the series used to be a very cohesive piece of game, and if something wasn't working, you could literally just walk down the hall to somebody's office and say, this isn't working, let's figure that out. Now they don't have that luxury anymore. They have to wait for something to be sent back to them, give feedback, send it back. I'm sure this is probably why the last 2 games have each taken 4.5 years each to be completed. And then we still are given a product that feels not quite smoothed out, cohesive,
finished,
tied together. Like the charm of the, I guess, like group project feel is missing. It's missing. And that it's so evident, not just within the game, but around the production too, and around the fact that Her Interactive's marketing team was getting so much grief and like angry comments because there's no update. And I understand both sides. It's not the fault of the marketing girls at Her Interactive that they have no update. It's not their fault. They want to give you an update as much as you want one. It's not their fault they have one. But I also understand the fans being like, yo, we are waiting so long for something. Please just tell us something. I understand both parties. The problem is that I'm sure you're just waiting on so-and-so, Joe, Scott, and Tim or whatever over at this studio to finish their section. And they probably have 15 contracts, different projects that they're all working on at the same time. And they have their own lives and they have to prioritize based on probably who's paying them the most or, whatever. Like, I'm sure there are tons of factors that we do not see behind the scenes of like the workings of all of this. But this is the detriment now to the fact that you're not making your game in-house. And so it's becoming evident in your product that you are not making your games from start to finish in-house. And the creativity of that process is being lost because now Her Interactive, they may have creative control, but they do not have the creative influence that they had in every step, in every working day's work, in every decision Everything was creatively decided by Her Interactive as a team, and now they have to hopefully communicate the best they can to somebody else, hope they understand the vision, and then it's back and forth until they go, well, that's as good as we're gonna get. And I just think it's hard to see that, but I think that's what's happening. And I probably don't have all of the information, and I'm not going to claim to know how it's all going down day by day, but that just kind of from context clues and even just the credits of the game itself, I'm sure it's probably something along those lines. So 0 points for creativity. So what was your final score?
My final score for Nancy Drew number 34, Mystery of the Seven Keys, is 2 out of 10.
Mine is 2.5 out of 10.
Ouch. Sad.
Yep.
This was a rough episode.
Yeah, I cried. Do you have anything else to say before we do some lightning round?
No, let's do some lightning round.
All right. Favorite puzzle?
Probably the puppet one.
Mine too.
I did enjoy that
one's
one.
Cute.
Yeah, I did enjoy it. It was one that I felt like, I can kind of figure this one out. So yeah, probably the puppet puzzle.
And I liked how they integrated sort of like the humor with the actual like background of like history of Prague and like the legend of the keys.
Yeah.
So. Okay, favorite character. Do you have one?
Not really. If I had to pick one, I mean, I felt like all of them were pretty bland, but I think if I had to pick a favorite, I would probably say the computer girl. What was her name? Elka. Yeah, I'd probably pick her because I feel like of the characters, we got the most information about her without her just explicitly telling us.
Absolutely.
Aside from the end, when we find out why she's, needs some therapy.
Yeah.
But the fact that we could like read her desk and like figure out some things, I feel like that was one of the few moments of good character development.
Yeah.
And so I did actually kind of feel like, I feel like I can kind of like suspect her or figure her out a little bit. So yeah, I'd say her.
Okay.
I still don't get what her little taser ring was all about. I don't get it.
That was just, she mentions it earlier about like her, because she works late in the shop at night and then walks home alone, that it's like her protection.
I don't remember her saying that at
It's
all.
a very throwaway line that she says like right after Nancy speakerphone calls that conversation.
Gotcha.
So, and then like the weird fog happens outside and Elka's like, you need to be careful out there or whatever she says,
Right. Gotcha.
So,
gotcha.
My favorite character, I think, would be Merrick, which is Elka's grandfather. I just thought that he was kind of like a nice character. He felt the most, like Czech to me. Like he was just kind of like an older man. He just liked his little trinkets. He was very handy. Good with like, just like a handyman, kind of like craftsman. And I just thought he felt the most natural in the story. Like he definitely grew up here. He definitely, loves his little shop. I just felt like of all the characters, he felt the most like this man grew up in Prague. Like I can definitely tell.
I'd agree with that. Yeah.
Okay. Least favorite moment. This can encompass a puzzle, an area, a plot. Least favorite moment.
Look at my notes. I feel like I wrote down.
If you want me to give my answer first, I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
I despise the fact that every time you have to go into the tunnels, a different exit is unlocked.
Oh yeah, I hated that too.
Why the heck? Why? That seems dangerous. If you are going to have multiple exits in and out of the tunnels, those exits should stay unblocked always. All of them.
It's like a fire hazard.
It is literally a fire hazard. Somebody could die down there because they're like, I went into the tunnels this way. How come I can't turn around and go back out the same way?
Yeah, that was pretty bad.
I hated that.
That was pretty bad. Least favorite moment?
Yeah. Could literally be anything. What was your least favorite thing about this game?
Okay, so that's really hard because I have some moments that I really hated from a story standpoint. I felt like it was just so stupid. Like leaving the keys in a purse outside the door.
Yeah.
I felt like that was the dumbest Nancy Drew moment in history.
Really?
Like story-wise, that is the dumbest, most like ridiculous plot convenience of all time. I hated that. But gameplay, I hated doing the latte art.
Mm-hmm.
I hated it. I was like, this isn't fun. I'm not enjoying this.
Some people can't even do it. Like their computer does not render the pattern, so you can't actually do it. And Her Interactive had to release a patch.
That's terrible.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
I
feel like I have pretty like steady hands and like good motor skills, but like they should have again another accessibility issue. I feel like they should correct that and have an ability to like skip. One thing, again, I'm not trying to pull out games that I'm playing currently, but I am playing Red Dead Redemption 2, and there's parts of the game that are technically there's a lot of finesse required in them, and once you've failed it a certain number of times, like you fail the mission and you can restart checkpoint, if you fail a checkpoint enough times because you're just not physically able to get past it, there's a button you can click and it says skip checkpoint.
Yeah.
And you can just skip past it. For something like that latte art, that should be an option because you have players. I mean, a 10-year-old doesn't have the dexterity of a 20-year-old. Like, right. You should have an ability to make the game more accessible
and there are
across the board.
Who have like tremors and things like that, you know, and that would be almost like pretty much borderline impossible for them to get past it. And making it a requirement, I think, is really rough. And I think they either need to make it less finicky and more forgiving, or they need to make it optional.
Yeah.
So. Okay, next question. In comparison to Nancy Drew games, so like we have both ranked all Nancy Drew games from what we think is the best to the least. Where, without like being super precise, where do you think this falls in that list?
Ooh.
I was going to pull your list up, which I have saved. If you
go
want
ahead.
That.
Go ahead. Do it for the fans.
Hang on. Let's see.
Don't give my answer. Go edit that part out.
Okay. So right now, your bottom 5. Okay.
Okay. This was years ago that I ranked this, so this may not still be accurate. Just all you viewers out there.
Your bottom 5 are currently ranked at from highest to lowest, like. So the last one that I read is going to be what you think is the worst.
At the very bottom.
Secrets Can Kill, The Creature of Kapu Cave, Ransom of 7 Ships, The Deadly Device, and Midnight in Salem is at the bottom currently. Do you think this is worse than Midnight in Salem?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I think just strictly because the mechanics, again, and like Midnight in Salem was another game that Tori and I played together, but I feel like if I was playing it on my own, I could have figured out enough of the game as I went, and or I could have looked up I could have looked up a few things and still enjoyed the game. This game, I really do feel like I would have had to look up every single piece of the game, and to me that's not enjoyable. So yeah, I think it's worse than Midnight in Salem. I think it's all the way to the bottom.
Okay. For me, I ranked this at 31 out of 34. I do think Midnight in Salem was a little bit worse, especially because there were basically no puzzles in Midnight in Salem, and I felt like the story was absolute garbage in Midnight in Salem. So, I do think it's slightly worse.
What's below?
I think the worst game ever is still Ransom of the 7 Ships, with Creature of Kapu Cave being a close second behind that. But it's still low. Like, I still think that this game is really, really low. And, you know, I haven't really updated my list in a long time either. But, yeah, it's still in the bottom. It's 4th from the bottom for me. So,
yeah. And I think that, to me, it's really important for me to be able to play a game, to like pick up a game and go through it completely blind and not look anything up.
Yeah.
That's really, really important to me. I have used my fair share of strategy guides and I do enjoy them. Especially like some of the Legend of Zelda games, figuring out the dungeons and stuff like that. With especially like older style games, or if you're trying to 100% complete things, like I do use strategy guides here and there. But to me, it's really important to be able to just pick up a game and go.
Yeah.
And
everything being self-contained.
This game, you just can't.
Yeah.
You can't. And even Midnight in Salem, although I do agree, like visually, there's a lot of like, it had some major flaws, I think. But from what I remember of the gameplay, it was still relatively pleasant to play, like the experience. And I feel like maybe what kind of holds a little bit more weight for Midnight in Salem with me is the setting is still pretty cool.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like Halloween, Salem, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Like the setting's still pretty cool. And here it's so bland. So it's like, I don't even have like, oh, well, but I get to go explore this cool clock. Like that's fun. Or I get to, these tunnels are really exciting. Like that part's fun. Like it doesn't even offer that. It's just super bland and it's not fun to play. So yeah.
So the last question that I have is, do you think the future of Her Interactive is hopeful or bleak?
Ooh, that is a loaded question.
Obviously we don't know the future, so it's hard to really answer, but just from your perspective.
That's a tough question. You probably could ask me on a different day and I would give you a different answer. But I would say right now, I would say like the absolute like realist in me would say I don't think that Her Interactive with its current leadership, I think all their best days are behind them. I don't think they're willing to listen to their fans. I don't think they're willing to adjust the way that the direction that they're moving. I think they've set their course and they're moving straight ahead and they're not changing their direction. Now, I do think if money talks and things stop becoming profitable for them, I think at some point they may have a wake-up call before they go under. Maybe they'll change leadership and someone will say, hold on, let's turn around and go back because we had it better back there. I think that's very plausible. I think that one thing I've noticed with Midnight in Salem was the marketing for that. There were YouTube ads everywhere for Midnight in Salem from what I can recall, and I haven't seen any advertisement at all for this game.
Very little.
Maybe they haven't had, now granted the quality of this game like visually and playability as far as like the way it operates on your computer seem to have improved from Midnight in Salem. So maybe they didn't have quite the marketing budget they used to have. But I think that if Her Interactive fails to gain new audience, I think that maybe they'll get a wake-up call that like, hey, our fans and like their kids are all playing the old games. Yeah. Like our Steam downloads for the old games are skyrocketing and nobody cares about our new games. Maybe they'll get a little bit of a wake-up call and kind of realize like, we got to go back to our roots here. It happens all the time. Yeah. I mean, it happens in TV, it happens in movies, it happens in books. I mean, there's so many forms of media that we, which is why we have this podcast. We love talking about it. I think there's plenty of forms of media that have shown that if we go back to our roots and give the people what they really want and what they value, then there will be profit down the road because we're producing a quality product. Yeah. I don't know if Her Interactive is going to make that call, but I could see both sides of the coin that, on the one hand, I don't think where they're at currently that they're going to make that call, but I think it would be interesting to see, this is kind of their second game that is lackluster in quality compared to prior games. So maybe they'll see some of that reflected in revenue, but maybe they won't. I don't know. Maybe the new fans are like, we want to play what's new and we're not used to any of the old stuff. So maybe they have found a new audience and they're just going to keep catering to that new demographic, but I would hope not.
Yeah.
maybe then their quality will continue to improve the way that it did. Maybe it's a restart. You know, they're going to continue to improve and get better and get more streamlined. And maybe this same direction will result in good quality.
Yeah.
So I feel like that didn't really answer your question.
No, I think it's fine. It's kind of what I was looking for, like just a discussion, really.
Yeah.
Because like I kind of feel similarly. I feel like what Her Interactive needs to do, what would make their future hopeful, is they need to continue to acknowledge, address, and fix in the future the complaints of fans and the mistakes that they make. And if they continue to do that, I will continue to like see a hopeful future. But I think if they try to continue to repackage the same mistakes in different wrapping paper, it's going to eventually alienate and burn out all of their long lasting loyal fans. So I think as long as they are giving the effort to listen to what's not working and fix that as they move forward, then I think things can still be hopeful.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I would agree.
Okay, well, is there anything else you'd like to say?
No.
All right.
I don't think so.
Well, thank you for joining us on this episode. We hope you had a good time. As always, feel free to tell us feedback. If there's things that you think we can improve on, please let us know. Or if you like what you see, let us know too. We like compliments. Links to our show notes, Patreon, socials, suggestion box is all on our website. That's lionandmousepodcast.com. You can also review this episode on whatever podcast platform you prefer. Let us know what you're thinking. Thank you so much for listening. As always, we will catch you in the next one.